Good morning. So today it is our pleasure to welcome Stéphane Arnoult from LAM in Marseille, from the Laboratoire d'Astrophysique de Marseille. Stéphane started his scientific career actually at IAP, doing his PhD with Valérie Delaparent. He worked on the photometric sample of the ISO Sculptor survey. And then Stéphane moved to Padova, working with Stefano Cristiani, Lauro Moscardini, mostly on the evolution of galaxy clustering in the HDF. And also this is, I think, where you started your work on the LeFar, right? On the software for doing photometric redshifts based on the template fitting method, which is, I think, the reference, is still the reference today, 20 years after I think you started working on this.
In Fortran 77.
You have to explain sometime the name at the LeFar, why you chose LeFar. And then you moved to ESO, where you worked also on the ESO imaging survey, and yes, I think. And then you got a position in Marseille, where you worked on GALEX, where you derived the luminosity function of in the UV, and also you started also working on VVDS, I think, and okay, and then you went to CFHT. Where you worked as staff astronomer right there, working on maintaining the WIRCAM infrared instrument, and this is also where I think you derived this technique to recover the far infrared flux from the UV and the near infrared observation, so which was very convenient because you can work with higher resolution data. And then you came back to Marseille, and you started getting more and more involved in this cosmic web business. With this, you were co-I of the SPINE ANR grant, and with Christophe Pichon here. And I think you would say a few things about that, the dependency of galaxy evolution and star formation with respect to the cosmic web. And also you will tell us about your latest project, which is another ANR which has just started. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for this long introduction. Okay, so today, does it work, the microphone? Yeah? Okay. So I will talk about the influence of the cosmic web in the galaxy evolution process. So it's the talk will be split in essentially two big parts, which is first how we do expect the cosmic web to contribute to impact the galaxy evolution beyond what we usually use, which is the density field where galaxies live. And so I will have a special focus on this aspect of the cosmic web to connect the two with large surveys and spectroscopic surveys. And also then it became apparently possible to do similar analysis, but moving back to the 2D information, so using photometric imaging surveys. And so it opened a new way. If you are able to get accurate enough distance of galaxies using photometric redshift, we can also explore the cosmic web in large imaging surveys. And so this opened a new door, and then we start projects dedicated to improve the photometric redshift based on the deep learning method. So I will talk specifically about that also today. And then to conclude, I will present also the PFS instrument briefly, where this is a spectrograph on Subaru, and where we will dedicate it quite some time to reconstruct the cosmic web in 3D, but at higher redshift than what we have now. So that's the plan I expect to do. So the basic framework for galaxy evolution is obviously extremely intricate between the galaxies are galaxies are obviously extremely intricate with the cosmic wave drawn by the dark matter. So sorry for the start. And so it's important to have the framework of the dark matter evolution to understand the galaxy. So the dark matter is essentially completely driven by the initial condition of the dark matter distribution and the density fluctuation measured at high redshift by Planck. And then this the dark matter will grow with as governed by the gravity, and the anisotropy of the dark matter fluctuation will grow over time, and finally, ultimately, will build up the cosmic web, which is done of nodes, filaments, and walls in this distribution. And so what the framework for the dark matter is pretty well understood. So you can follow the growth of this density fluctuation in the hierarchical framework of the called dark matter models, and predict the distribution of the dark matter halos in the universe. So the observation just run by the dark matter can pretty well reproduce what we observe today with the galaxy distribution. And so it's a good indication that the galaxies are indeed the baryon side of the universe, and the baryons follow obviously the growth of the dark matter, and ultimately, since the baryons can lose energy by radiation, they will be captured in the dark matter halos and then will cool in the disk in the core, in the potential well of the dark matter, and start to form stars. So this processes is also quite well understood, and but then all the physics of the baryons that will happen inside the galaxy is much more complex, and ultimately what we want is to understand this complex physics to draw the picture of a galaxy as we observe today, and the emergence of all the Hubble sequence between the different type of galaxies. So that's the framework, and we're connecting the dark matter from this to the baryons to build up a clear picture of how galaxies are formed today. So the galaxies are, that was the word, inextricably linked to the cosmic web, and are initially was considered as a monolithic and isolated system, but indeed now it's clear that the picture is much more open, and galaxies are complex interplay between their star formation activities from the gas, and also all the process that will connect the galaxies to its environment, where it will acquire the gas from the large-scale environment and transform this gas in star formation, in stars, and also a strong effect of feedback due to the star and AGN activities inside the galaxies. So for the star formation side, so it's clear that it's well known that the star formation is directly proportional to the amount of gas available in the galaxies. And if you just rewrite the mass of gas according to the star formation in the galaxy, you end up with a depletion time which is relatively short, of about a few giga-years. So which means that if you want to sustain the star formation in a galaxy, you inevitably need to fuel the galaxy in gas. And so the main ingredient for that is IgM, which is the gas distribution on large scale, which can be in different phases. Hot, where due to the gravitational shock heating of the gas in the dark matter potential, and also a cold component. So two modes are accretion are possible in the galaxies, is either via the hot mode, where you accrete, so the gas is hot in this phase and then get accreted in the halos of the dark matter, and will sink in the halo to form a dense gas and then form star. Another way also to acquire the gas can be directly from the filamentary structure and the cold, via the cold accretion mode. So the gas is accreted cold and can directly penetrate without being around inside the halos, but it can directly penetrate in the disk of the galaxy and fuel the galaxies. So this second mode, the cold accretion mode, is thought to be the dominant one at high redshift, while the hot mode is most likely to be dominant at lower redshift. And so it's really hard to pick up this info in the galaxies, and essentially this starts to be now well revealed by Cosmic Wave Imager on the cake, or MUSE on the VLT, where you start to see the filamentary structure connecting the galaxy in Lyman alpha. So, and because it's in Lyman alpha, you can, for the moment, just see it at high redshift. So the last part of all this process is inside the galaxy. You will accrete the gas, have star formation, build up a bulge, and ultimately you can end up also with black holes. So that will generate IgN activities in the core that will directly have impact by a strong ejection outflows in the galaxies. That will be combined also with supernova. So feedback is another key ingredient to really understand how the physics of the galaxies will be is evolving inside the galaxy. So you can get a complete picture of how a galaxy evolved by playing with these different factors. And indeed, how they compete between each other, the star formation in fall and feedback, is a key to get a final description of how the galaxies evolve. So on the baryon side, from the global view of the baryons, the picture has been now is now very clear. So we know that the cosmic star formation history has a nice behavior with redshift. So initially, star formation activity was increasing from the first 3 billion years, and then get to a plateau around redshift 1 and 2, and drop during the last 8 giga-year. So this drop can be indeed in some way understood directly also from the accretion rate of the dark matter halos, where we know from the simulation that the accretion rate on dark matter halo is increasing with redshift. So, and it correlates also well with the fact that galaxies are known to have a higher gas fraction at high redshift. So this can give a simple view of this picture. The corollary of this star formation history is the stellar mass density assembly, so the number of stars you have formed over time from this star formation. So it's obviously increasing as a star formation, and then get into a plateau due to the fact that the star formation is decreasing. And only the star matter density will only increase by a factor 2 from the last 8 giga-year. And what is also now well established is that the most massive galaxies are indeed in place quite early in the universe. So around redshift 1, the mass function of the star-forming galaxy is almost unchanged from redshift 1 to 0. So while the massive end of the elliptical or passive galaxies is already well in place at redshift 1 as well, and continue to build up the low mass part of the mass function at a later time. And indeed, since the mass function of the star forming is not evolving, you expect the star forming galaxies to halt their star formation and move in a passive population, which corresponds to the build-up we see in the mass function of the elliptical. So to understand the picture, here is a representation of the star formation normalized by stellar mass as a function of the stellar mass of the galaxies. And you have a nice main sequence of the star formation, which is regulated by the accretion and provide quite steady state phase for the star formation, for the galaxy to form star and accrete gas. And after some time, this galaxy will start to leave the main sequence of star formation and quench and build up the passive population of a galaxy, mainly with elliptical. So two kind of effects can produce this change. So obviously merger is one way to move from a spiral galaxies to an elliptical one, where no more star formation is involved. And so this kind of, beyond this type of merging phase, there is also internal mechanism that will be essentially driven by the stellar mass or the dark matter halos and the morphology of the galaxies. But there can be also environmental effect as merger, as I said, but also in galaxy in dense regions will also can lose gas by a stripping effect or harassment. And ultimately, you can also have a contribution of the density, but at larger scale from the cosmic web. So a quick, a few processes are defined to detect this behavior from star forming and passive galaxies. Some mechanisms which have been shown in the SDSS reveal that you can pick up at a given stellar mass, measure the metallicity of the star between the elliptical and the star forming, and the difference of metallicity can be essentially explained by the starvation of gas, or the inaccessibility of the gas for the galaxy to continue to form. So in this framework, so from the difference of the metallicity of star, you can estimate what should be the time scale to quench a galaxy, which is a relatively long time scale, about a few giga-years. So another interesting approach done with the VIPER survey was to show indeed that the star-forming galaxies with high stellar mass surface density and dominated essentially by bulge will leave, what we see at high redshift, will leave indeed the star-forming sequence at lower redshifts. So this suggests that indeed the buildup of the bulge can induce a quenching inside out, preventing the disk and the gas to fragment and form star. And so you can quench a galaxy just by a morphological transformation of the objects. So this is another way of moving from star forming to ellipticals. And if you look at different time scales just based on some color plots that isolate the elliptical galaxies from the star forming, you can draw some star formation history with some quenching mechanism and find that for the high mass star forming galaxies, you can move to the elliptical over a quite long time scale, about 3 to 4 giga-years, consistent with starvation processes. While for the low mass ellipticals, indeed, if you want to form a low mass elliptical galaxy, you need a much faster quenching that moves the galaxy from star forming to elliptical, and with a time scale which is much shorter, of the order of 0.1 giga-year. And so those type of objects are indeed found in the dense environment, like a cluster, where indeed the processes of quenching can be just gas stripping, or all these phenomena that are quick and specific to dense environment, and specific to satellite galaxies. So a nice picture also that has been shown is to measure the ratio between the quiescent galaxy and star forming, so what we call the red fraction of galaxies, and to explore how this ratio varies with the local density and with the stellar mass. So what you see here is the density, and here is the stellar mass, and what you see is that the fraction of passive galaxies is gradually increasing as a function of stellar mass at intermediate and low density. So only the main driver here for quenching galaxies is essentially the stellar mass, okay, of the objects. While if you move at higher density, what you see indeed is that low mass objects can start to get quenched, or the fraction of passive galaxies start to increase as a function of density. So this is the main driver in that direction, is the fact that the density increases, and low mass galaxies like satellite can start to get quenched. Intermediate stellar mass and intermediate density are a mix, so you have a competing factor between the two that will contribute to increase the fraction of quenched galaxies. So inside this picture, so we have connected the density and also implicitly the halo mass for this effect, as well as the stellar mass. But is there anything beyond just the density that can contribute? Indeed, if you look at large scale, so if you look at the cosmic wave is a geometric feature of cells where galaxies are distributed, and it's also a dynamical cosmic web, so just as a very basic order. So you can have the matter that will depart from this low density region and collapse into walls. Then galaxies into this wall, or dark matter into this wall, will flow and merge toward the filaments, and inside the filaments, the galaxy will flow towards the node. So there is these processes of evolution of the drift of matter, which is also the one from the galaxies. And so inside this dynamical environment, you expect indeed that a galaxy or a halo which is located in different environment will feel the tidal field of this cosmic web, large-scale cosmic web environment differently depending on where the galaxies are in the cosmic web. So basically, halos can be stored inside the thick filaments, where indeed most of the matter will recess from it, while halo, which is connected to several tiny filaments, can still accrete a large fraction of matter on it. Even a similar halo can have, depending on its environment, feel different tidal force from the cosmic web and then have a different history. So this basically tells you that the accretion history of halos is really sensitive to where the halos is located in the cosmic web. So, and this cosmic web, you can, here is a picture of one of the gamma field where we draw the galaxies. I attribute to each galaxy cosmic web properties, which is the nodes, the filaments, and walls and voids in this different color. And if you look at the density for these different cosmic web attributes, you can see that obviously the void galaxies are essentially in the low density regions, and filaments are the intermediate density, and nodes are the highest density. So, but overall, this different density contrast has a strong overlap between the different environments. So even at fixed density, you do expect the cosmic web to be different. So how this can impact, indeed, even at a fixed density, the galaxy properties depending on this environment is one of the answers that we want to try to address with the survey that I will describe later. So the fact that, so now it's well known that indeed this large-scale flow will have a direct impact on the dark matter, and indeed the dark matter halos will inherit some coherence from these large-scale flows. It's when the dark matter swirl along the filaments, they bring and they can advect angular momentum into the halo of into the dark matter halos, and into the disk of a galaxies. So the angular momentum can be convert directly to the disk galaxies. And indeed, there is some evidence for this with the fact that the alignment of the spine of the newly formed galaxies tend to be the spin of a galaxy tend to be aligned with the filament it's embedded in. And so this preferential orientations tell you that indeed there is a large-scale cosmic flow that has a direct impact on the galaxy and on the spine and the angular momentum of the galaxies. At high mass, the galaxy can be preferentially perpendicular to the filament due to the successive mergers that will happen inside the filament, and so the orbital momentum will be converted in a spin perpendicular to the galaxy. And this type of theoretical framework, which is also seen in the simulation, has been indeed observed in the SDSS over the last years, confirming this picture that at least for the angular momentum and the spin of galaxies, the large-scale environment can contribute to impact the galaxy properties. But beyond this angular momentum, is there anything that we can detect on the star formation and stellar mass galaxies that relate to the cosmic web? Those, obviously, star formation is the result of the history of the accretion, so you do expect that this can affect the galaxy properties on large scale. And so there are some evidence that are showing up on the fact that the cosmic web are an important element to understand. And indeed, massive galaxies have a higher fraction of H1 if they are close to the filament than if they are far from the filament, even at a fixed density. We expect a higher fraction of massive galaxies inside the filament than far from the filament. And the fraction of morphological change, so the elliptical to the spiral fraction, is clearly higher when you move close to the filament than when you are far from the filament. All this at a fixed density, so which is really bringing some new information that cosmic wave on large scale has an impact on the galaxy properties. There are also some other observations that show that there is no need for any additional ingredients on the halo mass to predict some clustering or luminosity function effect. So there is two different competing approaches. So here I will show what we have been doing over the last year, exploiting the large-scale spectroscopic surveys from VIPERS at high redshift, so these two redshift slides here, and the gamma survey at slightly lower redshift to address this problem. So the first thing is to be able to reconstruct the cosmic web. There are many different tools to do this reconstruction of cosmic web. Here we are using the dispersed code. And the nice thing about this code is that it works directly with the data point, the discrete data set. And so the dispersed will first use the Delaunay tessellation to triangulate your volume and to build the density estimation. From this density estimation, you can extract the critical points, which are the location where the density gradient vanish, so it's 0. So you extract 3 different types of points, maxima, minima, and saddle points. And then it will connect the different lines that draw the gradient flow moving from the maxima to the minima and define manifold that allows to catch the void patch and peak patch regions. And then from that, you can find critical lines, which are the lines that will connect the 2 maxima together via the saddle point, which is exactly the line where the gradient flow is the lowest. And in the same way, you can connect the 2 minima via the saddle point in the opposite side. So what matters here in our case, we want to define the filamentary structure, is essentially the one that connects the maxima to another maxima via the saddle point. And this pairing of critical points can be filtered using the persistence algorithm that allow you to keep up only the most robust galaxy pairs, critical pairs, comparing what you expect in a random distribution of set of points. So you can threshold or keep only the most robust pair by filtering using this algorithm. The nice things about that, it's completely scale-free, so it will just reconnect the different critical points together and filter the ones that are the less persistent. So just to show an illustration of that, here you have one of the VIPERS field here, which is the galaxy distribution, the reconstruction from the Delaunay tessellation, where you see in colors the different density contrast. So in orange is the highest density contrast, green is the filament, and blue is the densest region. So here it's a filter version of the density, the Delaunay tessellation density field. And here is the reconstruct filamentary structure, so in white. So you see the lines, which are the filaments that match and connect very well to the density field, where you can really see the filaments that connect to nodes or dense regions inside this picture. So that's how we have done the reconstruction of the cosmic web in the spectroscopic surveys. Here is just a 2D view of the same thing for the VIPERS field and the 2 different fields, and the filaments are in green, and with the black in the colors on the background is the density field. So we have done several tests to perform the accuracy of how accurate is our reconstruction, and we are quite convinced that this is a very robust approach. So we have done some mock catalogs with all the properties that we expect in our field. And so once you get this cosmic web reconstruction, you can now attach a galaxy, a cosmic web metric, so you can directly connect the galaxy to the cosmic web by looking at the galaxy, its distance to the different feature of the cosmic web, distance to the filament, distance to the wall, distance to saddle points and nodes, and then reinvestigate galaxy properties using this new metric of the cosmic web. to see if there is any trend as a function of this cosmic web environment. So here are the results on the Vipers fields. So where we separate a galaxy in two masses, and we look at the distance to the filament. And what we see is that the most massive one tend to be, so this is a PDF of the distribution of the massive galaxies as a function of distance, and the lowest mass galaxies in green. And so what you would see is the median is clearly shifted for the massive galaxies that tend to be much closer to the filament. And so this can be in part driven by the density, not only just the cosmic web, but it can be just the fact that the density is higher in the filament than outside the filament. So we perform some tests with some reshuffling in neurobeam of density, and we reshuffle the position of the galaxies according to their mass. So we preserve the mass density relation in that way. And after reshuffling, if there is no trend or no specificity of the cosmic wave to impact this relation, then we will expect that the correlation completely vanish. And indeed, in dashed line, you see that the correlation does not completely vanish. So, which means that here, the mass density relation is the primary driver of this effect, but we still have a small contribution that can come from the cosmic web, but as a secondary order effect. And we do the same with separation of type of galaxies by looking at the star forming and the passive. And again, the passive are slightly closer to the filament than the star forming one. And indeed, after reshuffling, here we have the dashed line, so which is a bit closer to zero, so it doesn't completely vanish, but it seems that there is clearly an effect that comes from the large scale ties that is better seen in the case of the type segregation than in the mass segregation. We extend this work with the gamma field, which are three different gamma pointings in a large area. But at lower redshift. Here we slightly improve all our results by compressing the groups according to finger of God, friend of friends anisotropic algorithm. And then we remove the nodes, because that's an important point. We remove the nodes from the analysis of the segregation effect. And so here are the results from the gamma. And we have the different mass illustrated here, so the most massive in red and the less massive in cyan. And so what we can see here, we still have a strong segregation effect with the density of filament. And after reshuffling, the correlation is much less. So there is a better signal here that shows that indeed cosmic wave can have an impact beyond the density. The same thing for star-forming galaxies alone, but split in mass. And again, the most star-forming galaxies are well in the center of the filaments than the less massive one. And again, the significance of this signal is quite good. And the type segregation is also observed here. So we confirm the initial trend, and with maybe even better signal that cosmic web contribute also beyond the density. So these results are also being extended to the walls. So we extract the walls on the gamma field, and we measure the distance to walls, and we still find the same type of segregation effect. Pushing beyond, we can also now look specifically with the galaxies, and specifically we look at how the rate fraction of galaxy evolve as a function of the distance to the filaments and the distance to the nodes. So here it's a combined version where you have the distance to filament here, and the three distance to nodes split here. And so you look at how the fraction of the rate fraction is increasing as a function of distance to filament. So you see clearly an increase when you get closer to the filament. And this effect is very strong as a function of distance to the nodes. So the closer to the nodes you are, the higher the fraction of passive galaxy is. So you observe an increase by 30% from far from the node to close to the nodes. And indeed, you also see that in the intermediate region, the fractions start already to increase, a clear indication that well before you reach the virial radius of a cluster or so, the galaxy are already starting to move in a fraction of the galaxy are already starting to move in passive mode. So which is a clear sign that inside the filament there is a preprocessing happening beyond reaching the halos. or the nodes, so which is in agreement with one of the results I mentioned before. And also, if you look at far from the node, you still see that the rate fraction is slowly increasing at a much lower rate, but from far from the filament to close to the filament. So this intermediate region, we already see a trend that transformation is happening in the filament even far from nodes. Another way to illustrate that is to look at the specific star formation rate, which is the star formation normalized by mass. And so we keep the mass out of this correlation by removing the average SSFR expected as a function of mass. And what you see is two ways to see it, but you can just see the red one, is the evolution of the SSFR as a function of distance to filament, the fraction, the difference. And so what is clear is you can clearly see that there is a gradual evolution of the SSFR when you get closer to filament. There is a kind of steady state here at intermediate distance, so where clearly galaxies are in quite a stable phase, and where you can easily understood that as the outskirt region of the filament, where galaxies indeed can consume their gas and at the same time can fuel their gas reservoir to maintain stable star formation activities. And so this is the surrounding of the filaments. When you get really inside the filaments, there is a clear drop. So the efficiency there clearly drop, and this can be attributed to different type of processes, which is either the halt of the supply of gas by strangulation, as I mentioned before, or also just that when you get really in the inner part of the cosmic web, filaments start to detach from your halos and cannot provide the additional gas necessary to maintain the star formation. So this type of findings are indeed quite well in agreement with what the theory and the hydrodynamical simulation show. So you do expect the more massive and quiescent galaxy to lie preferentially in the core of filaments, and that's where they will end up the growth of mass. And for the star-forming or low-mass galaxies, they prefer slightly the outskirts of the filament, where they can easily accrete the gas to sustain their star formation. And this drop when they get really close to the core of the filament. So this type of results clearly show that indeed addressing the galaxy evolution through the cosmic web metric is kind of a new way to explore the link between the galaxy and their environment beyond the density. And indeed, so this is done with the spectroscopic surveys, but indeed it has been recently shown by Clotilde Laigle that you can also nicely reconstruct the cosmic web in using photometric redshift with different slice within slice of redshift. And so basically, if you look at Cosmos, which is quite accurate photometric redshift thanks to the 30 bands, you can clearly see that you can reconstruct the 3D filamentary structure in a given redshift slice with only using the galaxy in 2D. So you can reconstruct the cosmic web nicely if you use narrow redshift slice, about 100 or 150 megaparsec. So this is possible with Cosmos because it's highly accurate. But if you want to explore a much larger field with the power of the future large imaging surveys, that means that you really have to improve your photometric redshift with a limited number of bands, which is usually the case for large surveys, to get and to be able to do this type of analysis, you typically need to get about 2% accuracy in sigma z, in the accuracy of your photometric redshift, to be able to slice the universe in thin 150, 200 megaparsec slice. So to do that, so currently for the photometric redshift, there are two different approaches, so which is two different type of families, so which is the SCD fitting or the machine learning. The properties of those type of surveys of the machinery, usually it's the fact that they use information, they don't use the images directly, they use extracted information from the photometry or in the color of the galaxy. So you need to extract features from the images. Okay, that's the main way we are doing it so far. So, but with the deep learning approach, you can push one step beyond, and indeed, you directly work at the pixel level. So you exploit the images themselves to perform the photometric redshift analysis. So this is a strong benefit because that means that you can keep all the information regarding your galaxies, the surface brightness, the size, inclination, everything will be included in the images, and you don't lose any information. And so doing that obviously requires a lot of resources, and it's very time-consuming, and so you need GPU, you need a training set, because this is a part of the machine learning processes, so you need a large training set to perform such analysis. But it becomes now under reach, and so we have started to explore that with SDSS surveys, so with a large data set of 500,000 galaxies. So we start to look at how the deep learning approach can perform such photometric redshift estimates. So the idea is to extract every stamps of galaxies of the SDSS in small stamps of here are some color images, and then from these images you will apply different convolution blocks. Okay, that will allow to, so you will apply a convolution that will allow to extract feature at a different level, and you will build several feature maps from this convolution, including some nonlinearity in your algorithm. So you will build some feature map, and you will apply different convolution, and you will reduce the size of the images, and you will reapply some convolution, and so on. So we will have different layers of compression of information, and every time you will extract new feature map with a smaller and smaller size, but including features that are more and more abstract over time. And after this feature map extraction, you will end up with a lot of small feature maps that you will connect to a neural network, and which will be directly connected to the classifier, and the classifier here will be used to attribute to each class a redshift. So you use the classifier as a small redshift bin information. So the idea then is to train with your galaxy sample, is to train the network to learn what should be given redshift for the galaxies that you know the redshift, what should be the input of the classifier. So which means that you need to backpropagate this information over 28 million of parameters to build this network. So doing so, you get, because it's a classifier at the end, you get a PDF for every object. So here are the PDF, and this PDF will give you information about your redshift. Basically here we use the mean of the PDF to attribute the redshift. So the results are here. So for the SDSS, so you get our result from the CNN is here. So as a function of the spectroscopic redshift, you get an accuracy of 9 × 10⁻³ with a very small amount of outliers. And this is a comparison with what has been offered so far for the SDSS based on the nearest neighbors algorithm, so another machine learning approach using the standard photometry. And so you already have improved the accuracy by at least a factor 30%. The nice things about that is that we can test how reliable and accurate are the PDF of our results. And here indeed there is a nice tool that is probability integral transform that just estimate from each object you measure how far when you just integrate the PDF until you reach the spectroscopic redshift. So what you expect if for the full sample of your data set, you expect that all the value of the PIT are well covered. So if the PDF is well calibrated, so all the value of PIT has to be equiprobable. And so if you are well calibrated, you expect a flat thing. But if you are not, then you can see features in this PIT for the total distribution of your sample. And that will be a good indicator that your PDF is either too broad, which is this type of shape, or is too narrow, so you underestimate the uncertainty of your hypothesis and will bring a different shape. So what we see is for the SDSS, is a shade histogram, is that we are pretty flat. so which is a really good indication that the PDF are well calibrated, which is essential for any type of use of the PDF for cosmology or for galaxy statistical measurements to control the accuracy of your photosy. So here are some features. So you see that the accuracy of the photosy are increasing with the signal-to-noise of the images. So the higher signal-to-noise have more accurate photosy on average, and that low signal-to-noise don't show a drop, fast increase, but are rather stable, which is nice. One of the nice things also is to look at how the inclination of this impact the photometric redshift, and indeed there is no trend. So clearly we can handle pretty well the different galaxy inclination, even if it generates a lot of opacity in the disk and also, and which is not the case for the other measurement from Beck et al., where you clearly see a trend, because it's quite difficult to control this type of things, and the deep learning do pretty well on that. And also there is no trend with the photosy. So there is absolutely a flat behavior, so we don't see any bias as a function of redshift, which is very good. So we also try to explore how the training set or the size of the training set has an impact on your accuracy. And if you split the sample in 2 or 5 or 20 or 50, you see that the global accuracy of the photosy didn't change much until we use a very, very small fraction of training set, which is about 10,000. But this is also a good indication that you are not too sensitive of the size of the samples to perform this analysis. So, in conclusion, here clearly CNN show a very good performance and provide very good PDF, so which are exactly what we ask for photosy. But now the goal is to try to move at higher redshift, so it becomes a bit more complicated because training sets are obviously more inhomogeneous, and also the number of class, because you increase the redshift range, the number of class will be much larger, and galaxies are intrinsically fainter. But if you move to, and potentially smaller, but if you move to higher images, deep images, you will gain in signal-to-noise. So here is an example of 2 CNN trained on the gamma survey, which is a bit fainter in magnitude. And we trained the CNN on the SDSS images, and another one on the CFHT-LS images, because gamma overlaps the 2 fields. So the result from the SDSS images is in red here. And those examples are stamps for SDSS and CFHT-LS images, so you see the difference of quality of images. And clearly there is a clear benefit to use higher signal-to-noise images, where you can get almost a factor 2 in terms of accuracy of your photosy. So here we move to the CFHT-LS field, which are deep multicolor images, and I show the training set that we have used for that. So it's a compilation of all the available spectroscopy in this area. But clearly, and here is the redshift distribution of the training set. So you can clearly see this is the density of sources, so you can clearly see that they are well sampled here, but there is clear under density of low mass and of low redshift and faint objects in those samples. And this will have some consequences. So the results of the CNN on this data set, so which are magnitude typically of 22.5, is shown here. So you see that the CNN versus spectroscopic evolve pretty well. And we can compare with the photosy that has been derived with LOFAR based on the SED fitting on the same objects. And we have roughly a bit less than a factor 2 gain with CNN compared to the standard SED fitting. And so here is the global evolution as a function of redshift. You see that the CNN perform pretty good job below 0.02, which is what indeed we are looking at to reach, compared to the SED fitting, which is still much higher. Yeah. So there is a very good gain, and also there is no bias with redshift up to redshift 1, which is very good. We can use also a completely external data set that has not been seen either in the training or in the test sample with slightly lower resolution spectroscopy to check that our results are still as good. And indeed, we are here on average at 0.021, which is almost the same as what we get before. And the CD fitting get also the same accuracy. But what starts to appear here is, in fact, that we start to have some wrong CNN at low redshift that show up. And indeed, this is one of the issues that we have currently, is that for this type of regions, then the photo-Z can completely fail. And this is seen in this sample. And which have a better representation of this redshift regime. And indeed, this is also still translated in the PDF of individual sources, where here you see the median of the PDF in these 2D plots. And here it's clearly degraded, so much larger PDF because of this uncertainty. So the code knows that there is some uncertainty there, but still attributes the wrong redshift. So this is one of the issues that we have, is the importance of well-balanced the training set to measure this. So one way to deal with that, and that we try, is to put a weight on your sample so that you can get close to what should be the intrinsic distribution of the galaxy. So you can reweight all the galaxy during your learning process by putting this weight in the cost function of the CNN training during the training. But we didn't have a major improvement in the final accuracy. So this is clearly not enough to weight the initial training set to better account for that. The second issue is represented here. So you have the training set in gray, and the weighted version of the training set, which should be the standard redshift distribution that we expect in pink. And this is the result of all the inference in the W1 field, so with 1 million of sources in black. And you see that we have some spike at a small fraction compared to, so it's about 10% fluctuation around what you expect. But still, those spikes are in part inherit from the initial training set. So that means that there are also some things that we have to improve, is to be less sensitive to the training set. But still, the overall shape is pretty good. So this is about 10% of objects that can be affected by this. And but this is we just find here what is typical to any machine learning technique is the sensitivity to the training set. Of course. And one last test that we did very recently, over the last days, is to explore now in even deeper images, which is the images from the HSC deep surveys, where we have collected U-bands. So we basically have photometry, extremely deep photometry over a very large area, going from U-band to the Y-band, so covering all the optical range. Of extremely deep imaging. This data set is almost what we will get after all the exploitation of the LSST in terms of depth. Obviously not in terms of area, but we will get the same type of filters over the similar depths than LSST. So it's an excellent data set to see what we can get. So again, here is a training set that we have used, about 60,000 objects. And your N of Z from the training set, you clearly see that it's highly unbalanced between high redshift and low redshift. And here are the results at 23.5. So you get an accuracy about 0.017 up to 23.5 in this data set with a small fraction of outliers. And so here is a representation for different magnitudes. So as when we go deeper and deeper, the accuracy is slowly degrading. But you are still below 0.02 up to 23.5. And again, here is just an inference over the HSC, where you can see the N of Z over the full redshift range in this magnitude beams, and you can still see some spike appearing, even if you are very close from the expected redshift distribution. So we I think yeah, sorry. So I think the point here is really that this new technique is kind of promising because you can really improve the photo-Z compared to what we have done so far. But we still have to fight with to improve the training set So one way is to wait until the future generation of spectrograph that will provide a much larger sample at faint magnitude and much more redshift. But we can also use a deep learning approach to try to better balance the training set and to generate yourself a new training set, either by using the adversarial network that can resimulate galaxy in the regions where you have deficit of objects and populate with this simulated galaxy, populate your training set to better balance the population in the underrepresented regions. We can also, what you have trained on one data set, transfer it to another data set. So all this type of approach can help to improve your training set and improve your photometric redshift, the final photometric redshift. So to do that, we start an ANR between Marseille, Paris, and Montpellier. And we will hire soon a postdoc on this dedicated deep learning approach. I think I skipped a few slides. Yes. So when you get this accurate photometric, is it 12? Or? Yeah. So then, sorry, I will just skip. So just to show one application of this photometric redshift results, here is one of the fields where I show the CFHTLS field, where I show the density color-coded in tiny box of white ascension and declination. So you see in color, so the high density regions, yellow is intermediate density regions, and blue low density region. And I overplot on this one the cosmic web that we have found, the filaments that we have found in Vipers in 3D, so projected in the same redshift slice. And you can see that the filaments are pretty well where you expect those to be in your galaxy density distribution. So you see that here, the density distribution from a thin redshift slice can give you the right answer on the cosmic web, just as a first glance by comparing with the 3D cosmic web. So we can apply that to the full CFHTLS in since redshift slice. So here you have the reconstruct filaments with dispersed in red, and the maxima are shown with a circle. So the first analysis that you can do here is to see how many filaments are connected to the maxima in this redshift slice. And indeed, this connection between the number of filaments that connects maxima is a good indication of the topology of your underlying density field. And so there is a nice formalist that exists that can describe how this connectivity should evolve with time. And indeed, the theory can predict this number of filaments connected to any maxima. And it's expected to increase with the dark matter halos. And this can also give you indication how this connectivity will evolve with time, since it will directly be dependent on the way the dark matter, the filaments can merge over time or can be disconnected over time due to the cosmology of the universe. So there is a clear dependence with the cosmological with the cosmology if you can extract this type of information over different redshift range. And this will directly trace the growth of the growth rate of the structure. So here is the results of our analysis of the number of filaments connected as a function of the maxima. And the maxima has been reordered according to the density that we measure in a cylinder. So the depth is the depth of your slice. And the radius gives you the size of the cylinder that we use. So we use a tiny cylinder of a radius of 1. And so reordering the maxima as a function of this density, we show that indeed the number of filaments are gradually increasing when we move to high density filaments, maxima. And so this is true for all the fields that we have done in the CFHTLS over all these redshifts, redshift range. So is these results comparable to what we can expect? Indeed, I did the same thing by comparing with simulations, the init simulation, where I do the same slice of redshift and I reanalyze the disperse to get the cosmic web, so the maxima and the filament, and measure the density of filament as a function of the density of the maxima. And you find exactly the same trend. are very close trend, so which is quite reassuring. And so this type of approach, using the 2D imaging surveys, can be really helpful and shows that it's potentially a good way to explore the cosmology with large imaging surveys. And also this connectivity will bring obviously new information regarding the assembly of group and clusters, as has been already proposed recently. So maybe I will stop here because I'm way too long. And okay, so that's it. Sorry.
Questions?
Very nice talk, Stéphane, thank you. It's interesting to see you evolved in many ways. So I want to go back to something you said on the first half of your talk. You showed the properties of galaxies as a distance to the filament. That one, yes, I think. And you showed that there's a mass segregation, and then there's a weaker type segregation, but types are correlated with mass. So did you try to look at types in bins of mass?
Yeah, no, indeed that's, yeah, no. So here is a type segregation. Huh?
Yes, but this is for all masses above 1046, whereas in
yeah,
mass
because
segregation you separate the masses in 3 bins.
No, yeah, but then the reshuffling is done by doing mass bin, neuromass bin, and reassessing the distance to cosmic wave. So,
so
that means that we preserve the mass type relation.
Okay.
So we don't change the mass type relation when we do this reshuffling.
Okay.
So there is this correlation.
So there is a residual correlation.
And so the fact that it's not completely vanished, that means that, yeah, is one of the reasons we find this trend. But the fact that it's much lower than the signal we detect means that it's not the only one. And that potentially the cosmic laws can contribute to this, to see this excess of passive galaxy close to the filament.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Can you comment a bit more on about how you expect the GAN will help improve your data set in terms of having not representative data?
So here, so this is what we will explore with people in Montpellier, which are the experts in the deep learning. But so the idea is we still have a quite. Let me go back. So I don't know where it is. Anyway, it's not. So the idea here is really to use the adversarial network to explore with what you talk about the GAN for the deep learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, we still have galaxies. Galaxies are underrepresented, but they are not missing. Okay, so we can have case where we don't have any galaxies, so we cannot do anything for that. But in this case, we have a pretty decent sample, and so the idea is to use the ones that we have, and to try to extract feature map of those objects and the properties of those objects, and try to generate new one with the GAN, so that at some point you are able to I don't know what you said. You are able to, the GAN, the new network is not able anymore to distinguish what is a real one, what is a simulated one. And when you get this level, that means that you can reproduce galaxies that are pretty close to what they should be. And you can use those ones to increase your training set. So the idea is that we already have a sample of well-defined galaxies in the poor training set regions, and we will use those one and the GAN to simulate new one to increase this region.
So to balance your data set, basically.
To rebalance the data. It's just a matter of putting the right, the weight is not on us. Weighting the luminosity, the cost function is clearly not on us to improve in that regime. So the only way is to better balance the training set and in the region where there is not enough training. And so if you don't have information, then there is no way you can simulate anything. If you already have a sample which is large enough, a few 10,000, you can start to think to simulate new ones.
Okay, thanks.
And balance training set.
Have you tried to do an estimation of the local density of dark matter along the cosmic web? Because this probably help to distinguish between different type of dark matters.
No.
No, you do because I suppose you need the velocity, dispersion velocity of the galaxies to measure, no?
But this will no. This will not be even enough. You mean to do stacking or to do? You want to do stacking to detect the dark matter? Here we don't detect the dark matter.
I mean, you have the distribution of galaxies,
yeah.
and you distinguish the filaments along the web. Therefore, and as you mentioned, there is a tidal effect from the dark matter for this construction. Therefore, a priori, you can relate these two to the local density of dark matter and to see how it is correlated with the density, other physical stuff that's happening around, and the models of dark matter, because if dark matter is, for instance, is warm or it is completely cold, the density and the extension is not the same. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I think that it is something interesting to see.
We haven't done anything so far on this type of approach, yeah. But I think the idea, if you get very large statistical sample, is at least to try to disentangle with the properties of the filaments, the length of filaments, thickness of filaments, to try to get a distribution of these properties and compare with simulations that where would you expect directly that yes. Filament lengths can change, and so this is clearly, I think the sample is way too small to perform this type of approach. But yes, on the long term, that can be a way, maybe more indirect, but that can be a way, just extracting the properties of filaments that you have and compare with simulation, so you can maybe start to disentangle the warm component or not of the dark matter. But clearly not at this
Not for
stage.
the time being. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Well, if not, let's thank our speaker again.